Welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. We are happy to be your source for messy, imperfect homeschool discussion. We aren't perfect. Our days range from magical to total shit show, and we share it all here with you honestly.
So true story for sure. So here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, you can expect secular, progressive content and community. There will be no flat earth nonsense, no statements of faith, and definitely no Jesus is my science curriculum energy. Okay. We have been homeschooling long enough. We have had a fill of that. That's not what we're here for. So here we loudly affirm Black Lives Matter. We say gender schminder because love trumps hate every time. And as for our uteruses, whatever, as for our lady parts, it's not up for debate, okay? If that sounds like the community you've been looking for, welcome home.
Speaking of welcome, we are beyond excited to introduce you to our guest today. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Debbie is a best-selling author, speaker, and the founder of Tilt Parenting, the author of our current book club selection, Differently Wired. She's been a game changer in the neurodiversity space, empowering parents to embrace and support their uniquely wired kids with confidence and clarity. Debbie has built a thriving community, which we'll talk about in a bit, that challenges outdated norms and champions a more inclusive future for all differently wired learners. So we are so excited for you being here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh my gosh. I'm so just grateful for the invitation and that you've been reading my book. That's so cool.
We've been reading it for a long time. Like last week we had planned to cover 3 tilts and we got 2 tilts done, but we're like, it's fine. It's resonating with the community. Nobody's like, gosh, would they move on already? So we're just taking our time and plugging along.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So as part of our Keeping It Real efforts, we do like to start each episode with a recap of our weeks. Since you're here though, right, we're going to do our best. We're going to challenge ourselves to recap in 90 seconds or less. We're both verbose in the best of situations. So we'll see how that goes. But let's go ahead and jump in.
So here we go. It's been a roller coaster of a week. We have recently moved, as regular listeners know. My daughter found studio space last week for all of her looms. When you're trying to move a child who weaves on massive looms, that's like really fun to try to find a space for in a city where noisy and neighbors don't really work and all that. So that was amazing. We did our fire safety work this week in the house. I got smoke alarms put up. My fire ladder arrived today. So I'm like super pumped about that. It feels like progress. The not so amazing is that my youngest kiddo, who is wildly neurodivergent, has ear infections upon ear infections. And so we ended up in the emergency room the other day for 10 hours on a Toradol drip because his pain sensors are greatly affected by his neurodivergence. And it's been a little rough. Like a lot rough. I'm pretty tired, but today he's feeling a little bit better. He laughed today and he hasn't laughed in many days because he just hasn't been up to it. And I think we're going to have some real food for dinner tonight. That's not a milkshake. So pretty pumped about that. So that's my week in a nutshell. How about you, Amanda?
You know, there have been a lot of shitty things that have happened in my personal life. So there's that, but I feel like I have been coming on for like the last month and a half being like, I'm so tired. I'm having such huge problems with my chronic fatigue syndrome. My long COVID is like completely out of control. Like things are awful. And this morning I was actually just thinking, you know what, this weekend, I think we'll do a family cleaning day on Saturday. And that's like a pretty good indication that I'm getting almost back to baseline. Like I don't like cleaning in the best of circumstances. So if I've decided to use my energy that way, that was kind of my indicator for the fact that like life is getting back on track. And that's pretty exciting. And then tomorrow night is my last official meeting as this board president thing that I've been like complaining about for months. So I'm super excited about that. I'm about done. So yeah, like things are just kind of looking up. So I have nothing to complain about today. Yeah, it's fine.
I'm glad you're zipping with a little bit more energy these days. That's exciting.
Yeah, right. It's such a relief to finally be on the other side of that for anyone who has chronic illness and knows like how long those flares, like sometimes it'll just be a few days, right? And then like weeks and weeks go by. And when is this gonna end? And what is happening? So I think it's wrapping up and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is.
All right. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm really excited to ask some questions here. Like we said, we've been reading your book for several weeks at this point, but it was a reread for both of us. Meagan and I read it in the first book club that we actually met in. That's how we met and started this whole thing. So, as we said, you wrote Differently Wired, but you wrote it before terms like neurodiversity became more widely understood in parenting circles. So, what shifts have you seen in the conversation around neurodivergence since then? And where do you kind of think the movement is headed in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, and I just have to say, first of all, thank you again for having me on for this conversation. I love talking about this stuff. And if the language was there, I would have called the book neurodivergent, right? Like the whole reason I called it Differently Wired was because that language was just not available. So it's fascinating to see what has happened in the past, 8 years since I wrote it, decades since I started Tilt. Some of the bigger shifts that I've seen, probably one of the biggest ones has to do with polyvagal theory and just awareness of that. Like if you're reading my book, there's no mention of polyvagal in there. That's one of the many things I want to add when I can get back in and do a revision. But I feel like Dr. Stephen Porges's work and the way it has really kind of infused the neurodivergent space and just this deeper understanding of nervous system regulation and how that impacts everything. And that's really what's going on with our kids when they're dysregulated is such a game changer. And I think of Dr. Mona Delahook's work and the way she's really helping people focus away from behavior and looking more at how can we support regulation. So that's a big thing. I think also, COVID had a lot to do with this, but there's this big influx of adults who are discovering their neurodivergence as a result of going through the process with their kids, ADHD, and autism. We talk about the lost generation of autistic women and you could say the same for ADHD women and not just women, of course, but there's so many adults. And that has been really fascinating to see how that has changed conversations, how people are kind of leaning into and embracing their neurodivergent identities, how people who've been in that space longer are kind of being much more just part of the conversation, or that we're encouraging parents when they find out about their child, like listen to autistic voices, like center the experience of neurodivergent people. That's really available, right? In so many different places that wasn't available even 5-10 years ago in the same way. And then the last thing I'll say, there's so many things that have changed, but another thing that I have noticed is this understanding and awareness of PDA, pathological demand avoidance, is like a technical name, but the nicer, less pathologized name is persistent desire for autonomy. And that, again, was something that just was not known, recognized, even in the US. Still, there's increasing awareness, although it is not part of the DSM. It can be hard to get support for that. But that has been a huge kind of shift in understanding about what does it really mean to be demand avoidant and what is the difference between, a can't versus a won't, and again, shifting away from behavior choices versus what is a person's tolerance for being able to navigate a certain environment. So those have been really exciting shifts that I've seen. So when I think about what's happening next, this is a really hard question because I have to say that in this moment in time, as we're having this conversation, unfortunately, I'm concerned that there's going to be kind of a backlash against just the bigger neurodivergent movement, right? So if you think about neurodivergence in the context of DEI, we know what's happening. And I really feel as though neurodivergence is going to be kind of swept into that. And that's concerning to me. I guess there are kind of ebbs and flows, right? And so there was kind of an explosion of awareness and understanding. And of course, during COVID, again, because of people were on TikTok or they had all this time to kind of understand and consider, maybe that's me too, right? And so perhaps there's an over identification with certain types of neurodivergence. And so I could see that kind of being pushed back. So that's kind of in the shorter, hopefully that's a very short term adjustment that happens. That would be my hope. But beyond that, I mean, I think what I hope for, certainly we're seeing in workplaces and a lot of different environments, especially in adult spaces, there seems to be an increasing awareness of and tolerance for supporting different types of support needs, right? So I hope that that continues. And I'm actually just reading this. I don't have it, or I would show it to you. Reading this book called Empire of Normality right now. And it's super fascinating. And it's about neurodivergence in the context of capitalism. And he's talking very much about the history of the neurodivergence movement, neurodiversity movement, and how tethered it is to capitalism in many ways. And so I find this really interesting. I'm trying to get him on my podcast, but I I think that would be really cool if we can actually, instead of focusing on how can, sorry, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but one of the things he's saying is that, we're talking about how to make people's neurodivergence still kind of, how can we as society benefit from other people's neurodivergence, which is a capitalist point of view, right? And so how can we kind of separate it from that? So it's really about self-determination and autonomy and being and not having to have value for the bigger society in order for it to have value or worth. So I'm not doing justice to his thesis, but that would be really interesting if we kind of moved in that direction over the next 5-10 years.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I've been posting things that are what would be classified under DEI lately and saying like, I'll put it online and say, take away the acronym, right? Here's what my child needed in order to attend this event. And it was provided. What did that harm you? How did that cost you anything? And I'm sure the people who don't care have hidden me, blocked me, whatever. You know what I mean? But I'm like, at the same time, it's like, it doesn't cost you anything for him to just have the supports in place that he needs. And it made it so that he could do a thing that your kid can do without a second thought. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a sad thing what's happening.
I will also say though, what the story you just shared, we also know that the supports there that are there to help neurodivergent students tend to be better for all students. So not only does it not take away, it may support the experience of neurotypical students.
Mhm.
And, I think it just requires kind of a shifting of perspective and a willingness to be open to things looking different than just, humming along the way things have always been.
Mhm. There was a thing that I saw online one day. It was a set of stairs with a ramp beside it, and it had snowed, and somebody was shoveling the stairs. And the child who was there, who was in a wheelchair, said, "Well, why don't you do the ramp?" And the person shoveling was like, "Because all these kids are waiting to do the stairs." And the kid was like, "Yeah, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all use the ramp, right?" Like, so instead of putting the effort into that one place first, like everyone benefits from the ramp in that case. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a very, very broken down example of what you're saying, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So many parents of neurodivergent kids feel like they're constantly advocating in systems that weren't built for their children. I was thinking that when you were talking about polyvagal, right? I had a kid who did MNRI therapy, and like to try to get that approved at this point through anything is basically impossible, no matter how many studies you can try to provide and all of that. So definitely it was like me swimming upstream like a tiny little salmon. So in your ideal world, what would true inclusion and accessibility look like in whatever system or systems you might want to choose, not just in education, but in society as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things come to mind. One is I just interviewed Jessica Slice about her book called Unfit Parent. And she's a disabled parent, and it's about being a disabled mother and what does that look like? And that conversation's really stayed with me. But if you think about any public spaces, like you just mentioned, a ramp, right? Public spaces should be accessible for everyone, no matter what their disability is, right? And I, including neurodivergence in there as a disability, same thing. Like all public spaces, whether it is the movie theater or a mall or airports or all these places where people interact and engage as part of society in an ideal world would accommodate the sensory needs, the different needs of their neurodivergent, the humans who show up. Cause we know, again, I talk about this in the book, but I think the statistic in the book is like 1 in 5. It's so much more than that. It's like, I think it's like 40-50% of people who have, some sort of regulation support needs. And, some people are better at coping strategies or hiding their stims or, regulating in a stealth way or masking. But that doesn't mean that everyone wouldn't benefit from that. And similarly, I think about that neurodivergence would be kind of normalized. So, and that includes like self-regulatory activities. So, if we just kind of instead of judging behavior or judging what somebody else is doing, judging the kid who's like jumping up and down, like flapping their hands, or judging, the kid who gets really loud and excited and keeps splurting and interrupting, or the kid who needs to do laps around the living room like my kid used to do just to write a sentence. If we could just be like, accommodate that. Because there's nothing wrong with it. It's only wrong because we have an expectation of what being good or normal looks like. So, yeah, I mean, that I would think if we could really get to a place of true inclusivity, it would just be like people get to take care of their needs and not be judged or otherwise for those needs. And the last thing I would say, well, certainly in school, I'll just say like universal design for learning, or schools would be designed so that mastery and knowledge and just understanding of concepts could be demonstrated in more than one way, that students could learn the way that they learn best. And if you're a musician, then you can use your music and leverage that to learn other things, right? Or not everyone has to write the same 5-paragraph paper, in this certain way, and everybody be measured against the same metric. So that's school's a whole other conversation. But the last thing I would say is that this whole concept of behaviorism would be abolished if we were truly inclusive, right? One of the things that Mona Delahook says in her book, Brain Body Parenting, is that there is no such thing as bad behavior. If you think about manipulative, that's what we think as parents, like, oh, my child knows better and they're just trying to annoy me right now, or they did this really disruptive thing and they know better. We make it a choice. We make it, defiance. We make it that they're trying to push our buttons, all of those things. Mona would say that like less than 1% of behavior is a willful choice to annoy someone or to do something bad. There's always an underlying reason. And so if you think about all behaviorism, which is about trying to just fix a behavior, we're missing the point, and it's harmful. It's really, really harmful to kids. And so to all humans. And it's the kind of stuff that we take into our adulthood, the shame and all of those things. So in truly inclusive society, when we saw bad behavior, instead of saying, how can we fix that behavior? We need to get this kid to stop doing this. We would look at them and say, I wonder what that child's nervous system needs right now. It's just a complete easy question to ask, and it would change everything.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I mean, you mentioned school as a whole giant issue that we don't usually get into here on this podcast. But the reality is most of the people who are following along and are really enjoying our book club right now, because we're covering Differently Wired, they're homeschooling and they're still trying to make this big shift in their own mind about how they fully embrace those differences. That thing, my kid won't sit down at the table to do writing. Like, well, do they need to, like my kid's writing is still terrible. They have to improve it. Well, do they need to, and what does that idea of like embracing the difference, leaning into the child you have instead of the child you think you should have or society says you should have or whatever. And homeschool parents are definitely not immune from that struggle. Even more, more prevalent for us in a lot of ways, I think.
I think so. Absolutely, because you have all this pressure like, "Oh my gosh, this is on me." Like, it's my
Mhm.
responsibility that this kid gets an education, and there's a lot of fear in that, and yeah, I get that. I mean, you guys know I homeschooled for 6 years, so I totally relate to that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're shifting a little, but not too much given what we were just talking about. So in your book, you talk about the importance of tilting instead of fixing. What's been the hardest part of truly embracing that mindset in your own life? We on the hot seat. So,
Well, I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today, and it's the same thing it has always been, and it still is to this day. As my kid is 20, I'm still very much like doing this work. I have a very high need for control. And, I know that about myself. I really want guaranteed outcomes. I also have a very low tolerance for things that I think are unfair or too difficult or just like too uncomfortable feeling. Like, I can't tolerate this. It's too much. And so that is really hard when you have a child who is a very kind of emotional, like on a very like all over the place emotionally, dysregulated, moody, all of the things, also has a very high need for autonomy and self control. It's messy. You used that word earlier in the intro to this podcast. I love that word. That is, just captures all of it, doesn't it? So I think for me, because I am so resourced and I know all the things. I've read all the books. And so when things do not go well, I definitely want to fix them. I want to guarantee an outcome. I know there's no guaranteed outcomes. I know deep in my heart that none of this matters, that what matters is that my child feels seen and safe and respected. And that my only goal is for my kid to, again, live a self-determined life where they can be who they want to be. And so that's like always my goal, but there's this other part of me that's like, yes, but if I could just do this or, if this happens or if we could just figure this out. And so those parts they have a lot of conversations still in my head. And then I share them with my therapist and we work through it and we just keep moving along.
I love that. We've talked about control in more episodes than I think I can even count, right? As the basis of so many things that can cause friction in parenting and homeschooling, all of that. We talked about it last week with one of the tilts, even where it was the one when you and Asher were caught out in the rain, and at the end of it, you just tossed school for the day and made hot chocolate. And we were talking about the fact like how many people would see that as giving in, or you let them win, or all of that, right? And letting them win at the root of it is that control thing. And culturally, I think, at least in America, I don't know about in other countries how parenting that is kind of passed down from one to the next. But this, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile kind of mentality. And so we have to always have this very firm line. And really that boils down to that control piece. And when we are willing to kind of flex and do that thing, what a beautiful ride it can be for all of us.
Yes. Yeah, and if can I just give a little shout out to the book Raising Free People? Do you know that book? Akila
Yes.
Richards? Yeah. I mean, that really what I loved about that book and our conversation is just this kind of really honoring who our kids are as creative, resourceful and whole beings that we get to be in relationship with, right? We're not here to dominate somebody or to mold somebody, but it's hard because that is not the message that we're sent, by society, by the media, by a lot of the parenting books out there. We feel like we should be able to kind of, you know, form this human that mirrors our values and that kind of, lets everybody know how great we are as parents. And that's just not what this is about.
Hmm. Oh, I love it.
okay, so we definitely have more to talk about. We always have more to talk about. You know us, especially if you listen to us on the regular. But we usually do a little call to action and bring something up in the middle. We decided today that we really wanted to just take a quick break and talk about tilt parenting. Now, we talk about all kinds of different things and we recommend and sponsor all sorts of different things. My best friend actually has a kid who's in public school. And she absolutely loves tilt parenting. She sent it to me not too long ago and was like, do you know this? And I was like, actually, I know all about that. And you're going to love the next interview that we have on our podcast. She, as a public schooler, she follows the podcast and it's supportive of me, but not quite as much as I'd like her to. Well, in any event, we have Debbie here. It seems like an absolute missed opportunity if we don't give her the floor to just tell us a little bit about Tilt Parenting, which is her company, and all of the different pieces and parts that are in that and how it can help families.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah. So as we're recording this, I'm almost at the 9-year anniversary of when I launched Tilt, which is really cool and crazy. And because I'm still kind of building the plane as I'm flying it, but Tilt is a podcast. That's what I started it as. So I release a new episode every week and then repeats on Fridays. So 437 episodes at this point. So that's a great way to get access to information. And then I also have a lot of community stuff on there. And one of the resources I would love, if this conversation is resonating with people or my book does resonate as well, I have something called the Differently Wired 7-Day Challenge. And I basically, every day for 7 days, you get a short video. It's like 2 minutes. It's not a huge time investment, but it's on a different tilt. And, the whole point of the work that I do is to support parents in changing their experience as opposed to like fixing your kids X, Y, or Z. And so every day for 7 days, you are introduced to a new tilt and you get a little challenge of something, like a little shift, a reframe, a tilt, if you will, that you can, work on to change your experience. So that's on there. I have like a lot of other free resources. And then if you really want to dive in and get time with me, I have it's called the Differently Wired Club, and it's a membership community. And it's like my favorite thing that I do. I've been doing it for 5 years. We have multiple live calls a month. I was on one last night with like 11 members, and we just like we're just in it together, right? It's real community. It just fills me up so much. So that is also a resource there, but definitely start with the podcast if that's something that is interesting for people. There's a lot there.
We actually had one of our live calls last night as well, which was awesome. And yeah, that thing that it's so nice when you can actually have these regular, consistent calls with people and connect and that sort of thing. And then also, you didn't exactly bring it up, but I do know that you've got some really affordable courses on there as well.
Yeah, I try to have a lot of free stuff, a lot of different, all over the place, because I want to make sure people have different ways to engage with the info they need.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I was thinking earlier about the number of topics that we landed on last night during our live call and how when you're in that and people are asking all different questions that apply to them. And I was like, we ran the gamut last night, right? And it feels so good to sit and have those conversations. So
what's great about it too is that like even in it, I'm sure this happens on your calls, like everybody's different. Everyone's got their own stuff going on. Probably the ages of the kids that they're parenting are all over the place, but we all learn from each other, because if someone's got older kids, they've been through this, they have this experience. And for the younger people, with younger kids, they get to kind of have a look at what it's going to be like. But, I get off those calls. I'm supposed to be like running them, but I learned so much from my community. It's the best.
Yeah, it is awesome. Well, I love that. And we will make sure to link in the show notes how you find Debbie's community and all that good stuff so that when you're listening, you can just easily hop on over and continue the conversation there as well. So be sure to check the show notes for all kinds of resources after today's episode. Thank you for sharing with us. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. So, okay, you work with these parents, as you just talked about, in your community and through calls and things like that. And I'm assuming in your head, you have oodles of kind of like case files of different things. And of course, we're not asking you to break anyone's confidence, right? But we would love to know if there's a piece of advice that you've discovered that is often given to parents from other sources, not from you, or before they have found you, that relates to them parenting neurodivergent kids that you believe is actually more harmful than helpful. Because I'm thinking we might have a listener who's been given this piece of advice from someone and they're trying to make it work and it's not working and all of that. I mean, we launched an episode today on the day that we're recording this, where we had a parent on who parents a profoundly autistic child. And she said when they diagnosed her kid, they said, she's never going to talk. She's never going to live independently. She's never going to do this. Here's a folder. Have a great day. Right. And just like sent her on her way. So there's a lot of lack of support or misinformation out there. So what misinformation would you love to just get?
I mean, there are a couple things that come up for me. Okay. So one of them is, we're often handed this like zone chart, like the zones of regulation. And there's the red zone. We don't want our kids in the red zone. Then there's the yellow zone, and they're kind of getting it dysregulated, but we really want them in the green zone. And that's just one example. But I remember, when my kiddo was in first grade, like they went to school with this document to sit on their desk so that they could have this visual cue of like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm moving into the yellow zone. I better use a coping strategy, right? And then we reinforce this with behavioral support plans and getting a sticker and filling out a chart. And those are tied to rewards and all of this stuff. And I think that because parents are often so desperate, often, especially if there's explosive big behavior, or they're really not thriving in an environment that we want that behavior to stop. So everybody else does too, right? The teachers, the schools, there's a lot of people invested in things changing. And so, of course, those don't work. And so that just makes parents feel like failures, and more hopeless that their child's going to figure this out. And so that's one piece of advice, is just expecting our kids, our little kids, right? With even if they're like chronologically like 6, 7, 8, 9, they're like socially, emotionally, they're much younger than that. We're expecting them. I can't even take a pause half the time when I'm going into the yellow zone. So I think parents spend so much time spinning their wheels trying to force will something to happen that is just not possible and can be really harmful. So that is one thing that I wanted to bring up. There's two other things if I can share them.
Go.
One of them is, and this is something that Danny Rady, who is one of the founders of, what is his Asperger Experts, I learned from him, and I actually talk about it in the book. But there's such a focus on social skills, especially with autistic kids or kids with ADHD who struggle, reading social cues. And that is often where parents are steered in a direction: social skills groups, social training, social thinking, all of these things. And really what we know is that we should be focusing on regulation. We should be focusing on helping this child feel safe, helping them understand who they are, understand their strengths, be curious about that, understand what they need to feel supported and calm in different environments, to trust their own instincts. There's so many pieces of social skills training that kind of are almost gaslighting our kids. And that does not mean that there isn't room to understand social nuances when a child is motivated and is curious about, okay, this is who I am and I see what's going on over here. I'd like to be able to engage with this community, and they want that kind of support. But when we kind of put so much pressure on social skills, when really we have a very dysregulated kid, we're also just, I think, doing a lot more harm than good. That's number 2. Number 3, this is my last one. I mean, there's many more, but this is the last one I'll share. And that is, sometimes parents are encouraged not to tell their kids about their identification. And that's always very surprising to me. And a lot of parents will come to my community and they'll be new and they'll have a question about, and there's so much fear and worry about what is it going to do to my child. And I really, and we're projecting, these parents are so projecting their own fear and anxiety on their child, which their child is going to feel. They're going to, internalize the angst of that parent who doesn't want to be honest with them. And this is not to shame anyone I had concerns about it too. I had questions. I was like, when do we tell this kid what's going on? Because I wanted to do it right. And of course I was worried because if we don't know what we don't know, and we know the reality of the world that we're living in right now. But I think it's a big disservice to hide a child's neurodivergence from them. And really what we want to do is normalize it. We just want to talk about it like anything else because it is like anything else. It's just part of who they are. It's not a good or a bad thing. It is what it is. And so, yeah, that's a big one. And I'm still kind of, I think because of who I hang out with, that's not part of my ecosystem anymore. And I'm always shocked when I hear that that was the advice given to a parent. I'm like, it's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. That totally reminds me if anyone watches or follows Mr. Williams, the pre-K teacher on social
Oh,
media.
yes, I
He
do.
had just shared actually a story about where he had in his adult life gotten an autism spectrum diagnosis, and he was like back home, saw a former teacher and had told the teacher like, oh, like so much makes sense. I was diagnosed with autism. And the teacher was like, you didn't know that? It was on your IEP and all of your goals. And he was like, my mom has passed. And so he couldn't have that conversation with her. But his whole childhood, all through school, everyone supporting him and working with him knew this piece that he didn't find out until he was an adult and out on his own and, trying to find answers. And it's that like knowledge is power. Knowledge is always power. And I can't imagine keeping that much power from your kiddo, right? Obviously, there's a good way to do it. There are better ways to share it than others and, and all of that sort of thing. But like, share it.
Yeah. Well, and he's been very open with the impact that his diagnoses and understanding his diagnoses have had on his mental health and eating disorders and things like that, that he's been struggling with for so long. And having that information was like a key in a lock where he was just like, oh, I get it now, right? It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's simple, but it makes it make sense. It makes it less blurry, that at least you can see the road that you're navigating as opposed to blindly just kind of feeling around and trying to figure out why you're so dysregulated in so many ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing. I know for me with all of the health things I have going on and all of that kind of stuff, right? You can't help but wonder what's wrong with me. And then once you have an answer, it's no longer like, what's wrong with me? It's like, oh, this is what I'm navigating. This is what I'm dealing with. And then that internal dialogue shifts from like something is wrong with me to like, oh, I have this and this is how I navigate that, right? Like I just have such a hard time understanding why someone would willingly put someone else through that. Like, so if you're listening and you're not sure how to do it, like come talk with Meagan and I, come talk with Debbie, like find another person that you support, another group online that can give you pointers or whatever, but definitely share. Don't keep your kiddo in the dark on these kinds of things.
I've even seen questions about like what impact it'll have on your kids now post January 2025 with talk about ADHD work farms and all this kind of stuff. It's an even scarier landscape. But even before that, there were these questions about what impact a diagnosis would have on a kid's future, right? Somebody was like, well, what if my kid wants to be a pilot? And I'm like, well, that seems like a pretty random thing to select out like, oh, okay, I should not get my child diagnosed because they might want to be a pilot. And my thought is, at first, I didn't know anything about that necessarily because we haven't gone down that path. And I was like, well, surely you could be a pilot if you have ADHD. And you can, but not if you're on medication. And I thought, I would much rather have the pilot of my plane diagnosed and medicated properly for their needs than hiding it to keep their job. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so frightening. Like this is, and I was like, no, if your kid wants to be a pilot, I'm so, like, sorry, but like your kid is so much better off getting a diagnosis and knowing what their needs are. And if they need medication, they take medication and all of those things. And there are other careers, right? Maybe they can, I was going to say be an air traffic controller, but robots are apparently going to do that now. So I don't know what, but they'll come up with something, right?
I mean, there's an astronaut. I can't remember who it is, but there's an astronaut who has ADHD very openly. So
There's
also,
options.
yeah, there are options. And if that is really what's going on with somebody, it's a disability. They need the support that they need. So
Yeah.
to kind of try to hide it is just going to put more pressure on a child to not be who they authentically are. And then when they don't succeed, they won't know why, right?
Mhm. Yes. All right. So this kind of again dovetails nicely, but we have a number of people in our community who are considering homeschooling but haven't yet taken that plunge, right, for a variety of reasons. What advice would you offer to those caregivers that may help them just find the path that's right for them and their learner or learners?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I always say to any parent on this path is that it's really helpful if you can let go of this idea that we're going to find the perfect solution that's going to last, right? So I think, again, I'm sure there are other listeners who have this high need for control and want some guaranteed outcomes, right? And so it's so hard to not future cast into, well, if I make this choice, then that means we're going down this road. And what does that mean? And, we start to kind of play this out in our minds about all wrong things that could happen if we make the wrong choice. And so we put all this pressure on ourselves. And so I think first of all, letting go of as much as we can of attachment to this kind of end goal that's ours, right? Like being a pilot or whatever it is. Like if we're focusing on that, we have no idea what this kid's life's going to look like. I can't predict what my child's going to be like 3 months from now. They're always changing and evolving. So to try to come up with the perfect thing right now to guarantee something is just it's an exercise in futility. It's just not possible. Period. So what I encourage parents to do is to focus on what does my child need right now? What does my child need for the next 3 months? What's going on right now? And how can I focus on supporting them to achieve that, right? Is my child feeling burned out? And maybe if they're considering homeschooling, things are like not going well in a school situation. And they're like, do I pull the plug or what do I do? Also relatable. I've been there. But it just feels like such a big thing. And we want to kind of find the solution moving forward. And I think if we're like, no, okay, right now my kid is distressed. My kid is in fight or flight mode most of the time. My kid's coming home from school and losing their mind. And our family's in chaos, pay attention to what's happening. And okay, what's my goal? The goal is always for our child to spend as much time as possible regulated, right? We want to grow the amount of time that they're feeling regulated. We want them to feel respected and seen, right? Tina Payne Bryson and Dan Siegel in their book, The Power of Showing Up, they talk about helping kids feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. The 4 S's. Dan Siegel loves a good, acronym. But so that's what we want. That is always going to be more important than anything else. We might have fears about, but how will they make friends or what's this going to happen? And what about AP? We can spin out about all of this stuff. But our kids have to feel safe and they have to feel respected and honored for who they are. And that's always going to trump everything else. And I'm sorry to use that word in my sentence. But so that's what I would say. And then again, just be nimble, have a curious and open mindset. Like your child is always going to be growing and evolving and changing. So what works now works now. My policy is like you do what's working until it stops working, and then you pivot and you do something else. And that's just life. That is always going to be the case, especially with a neurodivergent kid. They're just too complicated and fascinating to not always shake things up for us. So I think going into it like, okay, this is what we're doing now. I'm going to do it till it stops working. I'm going to pay attention, get information, and we're going to adjust as necessary. And sorry, one more piece. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling, but one more piece of advice is to do all of this in collaboration with your child, no matter how old they are. They're partners in this. And that's how we start that respectful dynamic with them. They're just a part of it. And we get to design this together. And what are your goals? What do you want to learn about? What do you care about? What excites you? and just pay attention to your own, like, yes, but I need to, and you start kind of I had a lot of charts when I started homeschooling, and I was like, but we have to do this, 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 and this. And my child was like, okay, whatever. That is not happening. They didn't say that. I learned it the hard way over 9 months of angst. But yeah, so lots of little pieces of advice, but I would say last one, trust your intuition, your gut. If it's telling you that this is what your child needs to be successful right now, I say go for it.
Go for it. And come, we'll all help you. Right? You just come hang out with us, go hang out in Debbie's community. We will get you there. There's plenty of resources. It's scary, but it's a supported scary. Right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of help there. All right. So we've had a number of discussions lately on the podcast about structure and flexibility in homeschooling and kind of balancing those two. So it was funny when you brought up earlier the book about neurodivergence and capitalism meshing together, because we did a whole thing about America's end stage capitalism situation and monochronic versus polychronic cultures and this need for structure in school and things of that nature. So when you said that, I was like adding it to my book list, right? So I feel like there's some stereotypes that go along with various neurodivergencies sometimes, right? Like, you get like autism, doesn't look people in the eye. Not all autistic individuals function that way, right? But there's kind of these knee-jerk stereotype reactions to certain things. And one of them I feel like is structure. Oh, as soon as you get that diagnosis, the whole day has to be structured. We have to structure everything because they thrive on structure. And some may not. So I'm curious what your thoughts are after raising your kiddo to the amazing age of 20. And I know your job is not done. It's never done. But how do you suggest parents find the right balance between flexibility and structure in the differently wired world?
That is such a good question. And I would say that that whole structure thing, I would really just start by questioning that, because yeah, some kids really need a lot of structure, but it might be structure within a lot of openness and flexibility. So it might not be this kind of overarching structure. It might be complete freedom, but in one activity, more structure, right? So I think we want to always be kind of growing our fluency. That's one of the tilts in the book, is become fluent in your child's language, but we want to like really get to know what is their need, right? And pay attention to their regulation. Like, what is it that helps them be successful? I would say, the question you said about the balance between honoring their style while ensuring they gain these kind of life skills. I'm just a big fan of questioning everything. And that even makes me think, what is a life skill? What even is that? Like, what do we need to know to be human? What makes someone be successful and acceptable? Again, we're so driven by fear, and you just can't have this conversation without talking about the role of fear. And it comes up all the time in my community. Showers, personal hygiene, like all of these things, and deodorant is such a topic of conversation. And I'm like, you know what? If my kid's not going to wear deodorant because it's a sensory thing, who cares? At some point, maybe there'll be feedback in a social situation and they'll be like, oh, I think I should start wearing deodorant, but I don't care. It's not my hill to die on, right? So I would say all of those shoulds just have to absolutely be questioned. What is the why does this feel like a should to you? Does it really matter? And that brings up Alfie Kohn's Unconditional Parenting book and work, which is so phenomenal, I think. But just kind of questioning, does this really matter? Questioning the timeline. Does this actually honor where my child is? We know that kids learn things when they feel that they have agency over the learning and they're intrinsically motivated to do so. They can learn things so quickly if it matters to them, right? So, especially when we're homeschooling kids, like that's the whole point. You get to do this on your own terms. You get to learn in a way that feels good. You get to dive into things. You get to, you know, kind of grow your sense of competency in a way that really feels like integrated into who you are. Like that's incredible to have that opportunity. So the last thing I'll say about this is, we talked earlier about the window of tolerance. And so for me, like when I'm thinking about these, there are life skills that are helpful to know, right? But I really like looking for just the littlest opening in that window of tolerance. And then I'm like, ooh, I think there's an opportunity for me to slip something in here. And I do it very like stealthily in a way. I use declarative language, very not like I no demands. I'm just very kind of curious. And I leverage my kids' interests and strengths and try to see, oh, maybe we can grow this a little bit. And it's just, it, again, it involves that fluency and paying attention. But the most important work has to be us just being like, does this actually matter? And why do I care so much? And what's the worst thing that could happen if my child learns this later? What's the worst thing that could happen if my child never learns this? Probably going to be okay.
Mhm. I love that. I was laughing a little bit because I was saying to Amanda either last week when we were reading the book or the week before, the amount of Tom's Silly Strawberry toothpaste that I moved to Europe with was like no small thing, right? Like I might have looked suspicious if somebody searched the bag. The thing is like, that's the only toothpaste that is going to fly. So here we go. And that and this one deodorant, and I have mountains of it. So totally get it.
Do I say in the book that I had to move when we moved back? We lived here before and then we moved back to the States. I had to bring boxes and boxes of Elmer light mint toothpaste back to the States. And then when I would come back here to visit, I bring more back. And now I'm like, well, the first time after we moved back, we went to Atos, which is our pharmacy. I'm like, look at this aisle. It's all right here for you. It was very exciting.
I know I was going to, like you say, it's the little things, but that's not little. It's big in your world. So it's like, it may seem little to other people, but yeah, I've got, an entire cabinet. You open it up and it's like something off like an influencer video when they open it's just products and products. And I'm like, maybe we could get a Tom's of Maine sponsorship or something, Amanda. Oh my gosh. All right. So I had made a note on our notes for today that I added just a little while ago. And I was like, if we have time, so I'm totally going to try to squeak it in. So there's a story in your book. There's one of the tilts. It's about a girl who struggles with toothbrushing and all the sensory stuff that comes along with toothbrushing. And you talked about the fact like she throws the toothbrush at the mother and the whole thing, right? And yes, we're all about being flexible and we question everything and we do all this stuff. And the deodorant thing, okay, yes, sometime it might influence you socially, etc. And so then that might be the change. But when it comes to teeth, right, it's like this is like a major health thing. Like, what do you do? Because in the book, I was reading it and I was like, yes, I know this. Yes. And I was waiting for like this grand advice. And then I was like, but what do you do? Right. So then I was like, this is a cliffhanger. Does it continue on the next page? Like, what happens when your kid refuses to brush their teeth and throws toothbrushes at you? What do you got for us?
I actually want to ask what you think you should do.
So my kiddo will brush teeth now. So thankfully we're there. Amanda talked about it during the episode about how the dentist was saying like, Mom, you're going to brush teeth, whatever. And Amanda was like, no, my kid, whatever. And we didn't talk about it last week, but I brushed their teeth for like forever. Right. Because
but my dentist said through 10 years old. And I was like, okay, at the 10-year appointment, she was like, you're still checking, right? And I was like, no, at this point, like the tween is doing it himself, like at some point where I'm drawing the line. But yeah.
So I brushed teeth up until like the last year for my youngest kiddo. And then we went to a phase of like handing it off and it didn't go very well. It was like really rocky. And we would be out in public and I'd be like, oh my God, your teeth have like sweaters on them. Like, did you not? Like, what happened? And so now we're to a point, we've got a timer system, but it was phased, right? It was a lot of support and a lot of structure and a lot of discussion and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, he's 13. So I think the kiddo in your book was a lot younger. And some kids have more enhanced reasoning skills than other kids do. So thankfully with my kiddo, I've talked about the fact that I've been able to reason with him since he's 2 and 3 years old, just because that's where he's at. So thankfully it's just slow going and a lot of reminders and a lot of iPhone, Apple Watch reminders and timers and all that kind of stuff. And we get there. But if you have a kid that you can't reason with and that, it is just like a no-go, like it becomes a screaming, et cetera, what do you do?
Yeah, I don't know if I have the perfect answer for that because like we can't force our kids. We can't
Yeah.
force our kids to do something, and it's going to hurt our relationship with them if we are physically holding them down to brush their teeth. And it's really hard. I would say lower the bar as low as it can go and try to move as slowly as humanly possible. Maybe that means maybe you do use some positive reinforcement. Maybe you do figure out what that child's like. If there is some motivating factor there to build up a muscle to start with a habit, maybe you go for like 2 nights a week and you do, yeah, maybe you make a game out of it. I think you get creative and you try to build that skill slowly over time. But I'll tell you, when your kid goes away to university, like I don't know what's going on. And I have to just keep fingers crossed, but it's ultimately our kids are going to, they're going to decide how they feel about their teeth and if they care that they have clean teeth and good dental hygiene. You can take a kid to the dentist every time. Like, are you flossing? No, you really should be. Are you brushing your teeth twice a day? Once. You need to do it twice. Okay. Is that going to change anything? Probably not. So I think you have to, if you zoom out, the big goals are connected relationship with our kids and them feeling respected, right? That's a huge driver for everybody. Everybody wants to feel respected, right? And also, as Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud write in their excellent book, The Self-Driven Child, like a need for control is like a basic human need. So however we proceed with our child, we want to keep those things in mind, no matter how young they are. And then we want to zoom out and, well, what is the ultimate goal here? The ultimate goal is that my child hopefully has some habits that support good dental hygiene. And how can I work towards that in a way like that is as slow as it needs to take for that to happen?
I have to say, actually, this discussion reminded me, I forgot about it when we talked about it in our last episode, but we had a kiddo who was a toddler who refused the whole teeth brushing thing. We were foster parents for several years. And the only thing that we could come up with was she was very happy to chew on a toothbrush as like a sensory thing. And it meant that I had to replace that toothbrush sometimes like once a week because it got chewed on so much. But I was like, you know what? If it never sees toothpaste, but at least we get her used to having, it's got to be doing something in there while she's chewing on it. Like, we won't call it good, and that was that like those steps, that slow process of whatever it takes to get them used to it. And, hopefully eventually you get to introduce like how to actually use the toothbrush or maybe chewing with some sort of toothpaste on it that does a little bit more than just kind of brush things away. But, that thing you have to do what you can do at the time and build from there.
Yeah.
It reminded me while you were sharing that we've gone past this phase, and I know we're anti-Amazon, but there's an app on Alexa that's a toothbrushing app for kids, and they tell jokes and there's riddles and stuff, and it's timed for how long you're supposed to brush your teeth. Totally forgot about it until you were talking, Debbie, and I was like, oh, I forgot about that phase of our journey of trying to get toothbrushing. And so it's like, you go through so many steps to get there, and sometimes you forget the journey actually looked like. So when you were describing it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that phase of life. So, but we did it.
20 toothbrushes as you try to find one that they'll agree to use, right? Your spouse is like, why do we have more toothbrushes? And like, don't worry about it. It's a thing. Don't worry
Look,
about
are
it.
there people living here that I haven't met yet?
Don't worry about it. Oh, man. Well, this was a great conversation. We usually wrap things up with a closing mantra. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way before we say our goodbyes. Today's mantra is neurodivergent kids aren't broken. They're brilliant. When we embrace who they are, we open the door to a world of possibility. Keep tilting, keep trusting, and keep building the future they deserve. Yeah. Take a little bit of time to really think on that one. Maybe rewind just to 10 seconds and listen again. That's a solid. Debbie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insight, and your encouragement with us today, right? Your work has been truly life-changing for so many families navigating the world of neurodivergence. And we are just so incredibly thankful for this conversation and the chance to sit down and chat with you.
Thank you. I so enjoyed the invitation and having this conversation with you. And I love the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. So, as a reminder for those who want to dive deeper into Debbie's work, be sure to check out Tilt Parenting. It's an incredible resource community. Head over there for any parents who are raising differently wired kids. You will love it. You can find her at tiltparenting.com. And again, we will link it in our show notes. You'll find the podcast, you'll find her book, and plenty of support for your journey. This is not a hand someone a folder and send them on their way situation. You have everything you need over there, which is awesome. And to our listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, share it with a fellow parent who needs to hear it, or maybe a grandparent who's open to learning more about some of the kids in their lives or some of the people in their lives. As always, thanks for hanging out with us. And remember, your kid is amazing, and so are you. So until next time, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.